The blinding light of an artillery explosion faded only to reveal a dilapidated wooden ceiling leaking muddy rainwater. A sudden rush of unfamiliar, chaotic memories flooded his mind, depicting a life of pathetic drunkenness and cruel domestic rage. The elite Special Forces captain realized he had transmigrated into the body of the village's most despised degenerate. In the corner of the dim room, two beautiful women in faded traditional robes trembled while holding each other closely. Their bruised wrists and terrified expressions clearly confirmed the horrific history of abuse left behind by the body's previous owner. The commander stood up completely, instantly shaking off the lingering effects of cheap liquor with pure mental discipline. He approached his new wives slowly, keeping his hands visibly open to signal that the violence had permanently ended. His deep voice echoed softly through the small space as he promised them they would never suffer from his hands again. The two women looked up in sheer disbelief, unable to comprehend the sudden transformation of their captor. Suddenly, the fragile front door was violently kicked open, splintering into several jagged pieces against the wall. Three heavily armed thugs sent by a corrupt local debt collector stepped across the threshold with malicious grins. The lead thug demanded immediate payment of the gambling debts, pointing his weapon directly at the cowering women. A dangerous, lethal glint flickered within the protagonist's eyes as his elite combat muscle memory took complete control. Without a single word of warning, he closed the distance with the speed of an executing strike team. His open palm struck the lead thug's throat with precise, devastating kinetic force, instantly crushing his windpipe. He seized the falling scimitar mid-air, spinning fluidly to redirect the second attacker's incoming slash. A single, calculated sweep of his leg sent the second thug crashing heavily against the stone hearth. The final remaining intruder dropped his weapon in pure panic, backing away from the monstrous tactical genius. The commander stepped out onto the muddy village street, dragging the heavy iron blade along the wet stones. He ordered the fleeing thug to inform his master that the household debts were officially settled in blood. Watching from behind dilapidated fences, the impoverished villagers gasped at the incredible display of combat prowess. Realizing that absolute strength was the only true currency in this lawless era, the commander began forming a survival plan. He returned inside to find his two wives carefully dressing each other's wounds with tattered rags. He promised them a life of absolute security, vowing to transform this vulnerable village into an impenetrable fortress. The next morning, he gathered the entire village population at the local elder's dilapidated courtyard. He announced an aggressive new labor management system designed to systematically fortify their perimeter against regional threats. An old, cynical blacksmith mocked his sudden leadership, pointing out his notorious past as a useless drunk. Without uttering a word, the commander grabbed a heavy iron forging hammer and shattered an anvil with an optimized strike. The display of incredible physical power and mechanical understanding instantly secured the strategic blacksmith's deepest loyalty. With the specialized craftsman secured, he divided the desperate young men of the village into structured labor teams. They began clearing the thick surrounding forestry to establish clear sight lines for any potential incoming military forces. He personally supervised the layout of deep defensive trenches, engineered with advanced interlocking kill zones. His two wives actively assisted by organizing the distribution of rations, gaining immense respect from the local families. Within days, the chaotic domain was completely transformed into a tightly organized, functional military outpost. However, the corrupt household remnants from the previous debt collector returned under the cover of a moonless night. They carried flasks of highly flammable oil, determined to burn down the village to reclaim their absolute dominance. Anticipating their exact tactical approach, the commander waited silently within the deep shadows of the watchtower. With a single release of his bowstring, a heavy arrow pierced the hand of the lead arsonist, dropping his torch. Hidden village guards sprang from the trenches, immediately encircling and disarming the terrified saboteurs. The commander stepped down from the tower, staring coldly at the captured remnants as they begged for mercy. Before he could interrogate them, a dying village scout stumbled through the gate with arrows protruding from his back. The scout gasped with his final breath that a massive horde of brutal barbarian scouts had just crossed the northern mountain pass. The sound of a distant, ominous war horn echoed through the dark valley, signaling an imminent and devastating invasion. The low, vibrating rumble of the barbarian war horn reverberated across the dark canyon walls, sending cold chills down the spines of the trembling villagers. Recognizing the signature pattern of a military scout vanguard, the transmigrated Special Forces operative immediately calculated the enemy's arrival time down to the minute. Local village guards dropped their crude spears in a panic, their faces draining of color as rumors of the bloodthirsty border legions spread like wildfire through the crowd. Stepping forward with absolute military poise, the commander slammed his fist onto the wooden table to instantly command the attention of every panicked man in the room. His two beautiful Eastern-style wives stood faithfully by his side, their initial terror gradually melting away into deep trust as they looked upon his unshakable posture. The protagonist knew that standard medieval militia tactics would result in total annihilation against the savage, heavy cavalry barbarian scouts. Drawing upon his deep knowledge of modern mechanical engineering and armored warfare, a radical design for a mobile wooden fortress began to take shape in his mind. Throughout the entire night, his charcoal stick flew across the rough paper, sketching out the precise internal gears, defensive spikes, and steering mechanisms of a revolutionary siege wagon. The schematics detailed a heavily reinforced wooden armored tank, complete with sloped armor plating designed to deflect incoming barbarian arrows completely. At dawn, the commander ordered his subordinates to gather the thousands of displaced border refugees who had recently fled into the valley seeking safety. A vast sea of desperate refugees sat huddled together in the muddy fields, their clothing tattered and their hollow eyes reflecting complete hopelessness. Standing upon a raised wooden platform, the protagonist delivered a piercing speech that promised them food, shelter, and vengeance if they lent him their strength. Ignited by his powerful words, hundreds of able-bodied craftsmen, blacksmiths, and young men stepped forward to volunteer for the newly formed defense force. The commander immediately divided the labor force into specialized units, assigning the veteran carpenters to process the massive oak logs brought down from the mountains. Blacksmithing furnaces were fired up to maximum capacity, belching dark smoke into the sky as iron was melted down to forge heavy reinforcement bolts and protective spikes. Meanwhile, the protagonist handpicked 40 of the most resilient, disciplined refugees to form his core tactical fighting crew. He subjected these men to grueling modern military physical conditioning, forcing them to run miles in heavy gear until their muscles screamed for relief. Whenever a recruit fell out of line or broke formation, the commander's voice boomed across the field like thunder, instilling unconditional discipline into their souls. Within just a single week of relentless training, the ragtag refugees began moving with the synchronous, deadly precision of a true modern special operations unit. Reports from the scout perimeter indicated that the barbarian main force had already broken through the northern pass, burning everything in their path. Time was rapidly running out, forcing the protagonist to spend his nights directly inside the construction yards alongside the exhausted carpenters. The village elders gasped in absolute wonder as the massive wooden armored tanks finally took their complete, terrifying physical form. The completed war machine was a marvel of adaptive engineering, featuring interconnected internal gear systems that allowed human operators to drive it forward efficiently. Heavy iron spikes protruded aggressively from the front bumper, designed to impale enemy charging horses and shatter enemy ranks instantly. Small, protected firing slits were carved into the thick side panels, allowing hidden crossbowmen to rain death upon attackers with absolute impunity. The commander gathered his specialized fighting crew inside the tanks, initiating intense tactical drills to coordinate their internal movements perfectly. Each member learned their specific operational role, from driving the massive wheels to rapidly reloading the heavy internal ballista mounted at the front. The protagonist knew that the key to modern tactical victory lay in surprise, camouflage, and maintaining absolute control over the terrain. He ordered the construction crews to cover the massive wooden tanks with fresh tree branches and dense brush to fully conceal them from barbarian scout riders. On the eve of the inevitable clash, his two wives approached him in the war room, gently wrapping a custom-tailored tactical leather chest piece around his torso. "Return to us safely," his first wife whispered softly, her hand lingering gently over his heart as tears welled up in her beautiful dark eyes. Placing his strong hands firmly on their shoulders, the reborn elite soldier promised them that no enemy would ever cross the village threshold while he still drew breath. Midnight arrived, and the sudden sound of heavy hooves pounding against the earth signaled that the barbarian scout vanguard had finally entered the lower valley. The hidden valley fell completely silent as the savage barbarian scouts slowed their pace, sensing an unusual lack of resistance along the main path. Hidden deep within the camouflaged foliage, the Special Forces commander raised his hand, tracking the enemy's formation through a narrow slit with absolute calmness. With a sudden, decisive downward swipe of his hand, he gave the absolute order to launch the devastating surprise counteroffensive. The massive camouflage nets tore away instantly as three monstrous wooden armored siege tanks burst forth from the tree line with a thunderous roar. The barbarian scout vanguard screamed in absolute horror as these unrecognizable mechanical beasts barreled directly toward their tight cavalry formation. The heavy iron-spiked bumpers slammed into the front ranks with catastrophic force, completely shattering the enemy's vanguard momentum in a single devastating blow. Suddenly, just as victory seemed within their grasp, a massive flaming boulder erupted from the dark mountain ridge above, smashing directly into the secondary tank's flank and revealing a hidden barbarian heavy artillery battery. The catastrophic impact of the flaming boulder shook the frozen earth as splinters of fortified oak rained down upon the panicked front line. Standing atop the command wagon, the transmigrated Special Forces commander locked his eyes on the distant mountain ridge where the hidden artillery battery flashed again. He raised his command flag high, bellowing orders to the engineering crew to adjust the primary ballast systems before the next volley landed. The well-trained border refugees quickly shook off their terror, grabbing their heavy iron levers to pivot the damaged vehicle away from the kill zone. With a grinding roar of wooden gears, the secondary armored tank rolled backward into the protective shadow of a massive granite cliff face. The commander unrolled his hand-drawn tactical map across the command table, tracing the hidden trajectory of the barbarian artillery with a charcoal stick. He knew from his past life's combat experience that heavy artillery emplacements always left their supply flanks vulnerable to rapid mobile exploitation. He summoned his loyal village captains to the command deck, mapping out a bold three-pronged operational flanking maneuver through the narrow valley floor. The primary infantry division, armed with advanced repeating crossbows designed by the commander himself, immediately moved out into the blinding snowstorm. They advanced silently along the lower ridge, using the thick forest canopy to mask their tactical progression from the scouting eyes above. Meanwhile, the main fleet of mobile armored siege war wagons revved their heavy internal tension springs, preparing to draw the enemy's main line of fire. Atop the fortified valley base, the barbarian legion commanders laughed brutally as they ordered their crews to reload the massive stone-throwing catapults. A second wave of burning boulders soared through the night sky, tracing a deadly incandescent arc across the dark clouds. The commander stood firm at the helm of the leading war wagon, steering the massive machine directly into the path of the incoming bombardment. With a sudden, forceful twist of the wheel, he drifted the heavy wooden vehicle sideways, causing the boulder to crash harmlessly into the empty snow beside them. This masterful evasion served as the ultimate signal for the flanking squads to launch their surprise assault on the vulnerable barbarian supply lines. Out of the dark winter woods, the elite refugee strike team burst forward with their repeating weapons, unleashing a relentless hail of iron-tipped bolts. The barbarian supply guards were caught completely off guard, dropping their weapons as the devastating volley tore through their flimsy leather armor. Within minutes, the village strike team reached the primary storage tents, hurling pitch-soaked torches onto the enemy's vital grain reserves. Massive secondary explosions rocked the valley as hidden stores of barbarian black powder caught fire, lighting up the midnight sky like a midday sun. The barbarian chieftain watched in sheer horror from the high fortress walls as his winter logistics network crumbled into ashes within seconds. Seizing the perfect moment of mass distraction, the Special Forces commander ordered the full-scale frontal charge of his armored division. The three massive wooden siege tanks surged forward in perfect synchronization, their heavy iron-shod tracks breaking through the deep mountain snowdrifts. The barbarian archers frantically loosed a desperate barrage of iron arrows, but the missiles bounced harmlessly off the reinforced wooden hulls. Inside the lead tank, the refugee engineering crew worked like a well-oiled machine, building up maximum steam pressure within the heavy steel pneumatic rams. The commander monitored the closing distance through a small observation slit, waiting for the exact split second to deploy their primary braking mechanism. With a deafening structural crunch, the iron ram of the lead siege tank smashed directly into the massive timber gates of the barbarian fortress. The barbarian frontline warriors shattered in retreat as the colossal wooden war machine rolled right over their perimeter defenses. The commander leapt down from the command platform with fluid military grace, his twin short swords drawn and gleaming in the firelight. He moved through the chaotic battlefield like a phantom, utilizing modern close-quarters combat techniques to neutralize 3 charging barbarians in a single breath. Inspired by their leader's peerless combat prowess, the village defenders poured through the breached gate, quickly consolidating control over the main courtyard. The barbarian chieftain charged down from his high tower, swinging a massive 2-handed iron executioner's axe directly toward the commander's head. The Special Forces veteran didn't flinch, calmly stepping inside the giant's clumsy trajectory and redirecting the heavy axe with a precise crossblock. Before the giant could recover his balance, the commander delivered a devastating tactical strike to his exposed knee, bringing the beast down to the frozen earth. With a swift, clean horizontal arc of his cold steel blade, the commander ended the barbarian chieftain's reign of regional terror once and for all. Seeing their supreme commander fallen, the remaining barbarian remnants threw down their weapons and knelt in absolute surrender. The village defenders let out a collective, thunderous cheer that echoed across the newly conquered valley, celebrating their first major strategic military triumph. The commander immediately ordered his men to secure the base's inner records room, seeking intelligence on who had supplied the barbarians with imperial black powder. He picked up a half-burned parchment from the central desk, recognizing a secretive imperial crest stamped at the bottom of the regional troop shipment manifest. Suddenly, a dying barbarian guard hidden beneath a pile of rubble wheezed out a bloody laugh, whispering that the real execution squad was already waiting for his wives inside the county lines. The protagonist instantly grabbed the dying barbarian guard by his collar, demanding the exact location of the execution squad. A final choking rattle left the guard's throat as his head went limp, leaving the warning hanging heavily in the smoke-filled air. Dropping the lifeless body onto the rubble, the commander spun around and whistled sharply toward his elite tactical crew. He ordered his trusted lieutenant to lead the armored siege wagons back to the village perimeter to reinforce its outer walls. With his personal crossbow locked onto his back, the protagonist sprinted toward his fastest war horse tied near the ravine. He mounted the black stallion in a single fluid motion and dug his spurs deep into its flanks. The horse thundered down the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust as the protagonist checked his custom-made iron watch. He mapped out the county borders in his mind, tracking the fastest route the fleeing hostile remnants would take to escape. Reaching a critical crossroads outside the county lines, he noticed fresh, erratic hoofprints leading toward a hidden ravine path. Ahead in the shadows, a group of 5 rogue barbarian scouts were pushing their exhausted horses to the absolute limit. The protagonist unslung his custom-engineered repeating crossbow, aiming it with cold, professional military precision. 3 steel-tipped bolts hissed through the night air simultaneously, striking the rear riders dead center in their backs. The remaining 2 scouts panicked, losing control of their mounts as the protagonist closed the distance within seconds. Drawing his modern-designed tactical daggers, he sliced through the 4th scout's throat with a clean, sweeping arc. The last surviving scout was thrown to the ground, his leg trapped beneath his fallen horse as the protagonist stood over him. Under the cold threat of a jagged blade, the scout whimpered that the Imperial Court assassins were masquerading as musicians at the Red Lotus Pavilion. With a swift flick of his wrist, the commander silenced the final scout forever, ensuring no word of his approach would leak out. He realized this institutional betrayal reached high into the regional government, requiring an immediate, unconventional counterstrike. Reaching the outskirts of the county town, he abandoned his horse and slipped past the corrupt wall guards using advanced infiltration techniques. He navigated the dark rooftops until he located the vibrant, lantern-lit layout of the Red Lotus Entertainment Pavilion. Inside a private, silk-curtained chamber, his 2 beautiful wives sat tightly bound to wooden chairs, surrounded by heavily armed men. The leader of the court assassins, dressed in a lavish scholar's robe, casually polished a hidden dagger while mocking the women. From the ceiling rafters, the protagonist looked down, his heart burning with an intense, deadly rage at the sight of his threatened family. He systematically counted 10 elite assassins placed strategically near the doors, windows, and behind the silk screens. Pulling a flashbang capsule engineered from local sulfur and magnesium from his pouch, he dropped it directly into the center chandelier. A blinding, deafening white explosion erupted through the room, sending the elite assassins into absolute chaos and blinding them instantly. Dropping from the ceiling like a phantom, the protagonist immediately drove his dagger through the throats of 2 blinded guards. He spun on his heel, using a fallen guard's sword to deflect an incoming blind swing from a nearby court executioner. With a powerful tactical kick, he shattered the opponent's knee and followed through with a decisive, fatal strike to the chest. The remaining assassins tried to regroup, but the protagonist moved with an unmatched speed born from modern elite Black Ops training. He retrieved his repeating crossbow, firing point blank into 3 hidden archers trying to aim from behind the pillars. The corrupt scholar leader grabbed the primary wife, holding a blade to her neck while backing away toward the rear balcony. The protagonist stopped in his tracks, lowering his hands slowly while shifting his weight to his back foot. He whispered a reassuring phrase known only to his wives, signaling them to drop their weight instantly. The primary wife slumped her entire body weight downward, forcing the startled scholar's blade to miss her entirely. In that microsecond, the protagonist threw a concealed modern throw knife straight through the forehead of the Imperial leader. The corrupt mastermind stumbled backward over the wooden railing, plunging into the dark waters of the river below. Rushing forward, the protagonist cut the ropes binding his 2 wives, pulling them both into a tight, fierce embrace. With the external invaders routed and the internal corrupt web entirely dismantled, his village was finally safe from all threats. Standing tall alongside his loving family, the elite Special Forces soldier turned hunter looked toward a bright, industrial, and prosperous future.